nonprofit human rights organization dedicated to ending abortion and affirming the life of every child. But I'm speaking mostly today from my personal capacity, just being a Christian, an individual that's worked in Washington, D.C. for 8 years now in conservative messaging. So there's a great C.S. Lewis quote I'll share with you about being on the front lines, because you guys are on the front lines. We are on the front lines of figuring out how to live out what are these Judeo-Christian values? What do they look like? What do they mean? Before I was at Live Action, I worked actually at Fox News, Concerned Women for America, and at Alliance Defending Freedom. So all really conservative groups here in Washington, D.C. So C.S. Lewis once said, "Ever since I served as an infantryman in the First World War, I have had a great dislike of people who themselves, in ease and safety, issue exhortations to men on the front line." And I can't agree more. Having served on the front lines here in DC through what was the Marriage March, we've fought against abortion, I've worked on issues of sex trafficking, support for Israel, education. This really is the front lines here, so I want to just say, I've been there, you guys are in it or joining it, so welcome. We need more good people on the front lines. As I prepared this speech, it challenged my faith, and so maybe some of you in here consider yourselves Jewish or Christian, maybe you don't, but I think the first step is knowing what you believe. For me, being able to teach it, to prepare this for you, helps me a lot. So if that's something that you feel you need to get better at, just know you're not alone in that. And I humbly come before you saying that I strive to deepen my own understanding of theology, which means love of God, using sacred scriptures as well as some of the best Christian thinkers and apologists of the last 2,000 years. I'll share some of their thoughts with you today. But first I want to share with you that I grew up raised by a father who had no mom and dad. He was actually orphaned as a child in a hotel room. And by a mother who was extremely poor. She was the youngest of 7 kids. She used to tell me about putting pennies in her socks. So when she went to school, she at least had something to buy a snack with. And they both grew up in the Catholic Church. They had us kids and decided they needed a cool, fun youth group. So that's why I'm probably more evangelical now. But they both are amazing at the work that they do, involved in our community. And they made sure that we knew, as girls, and the oldest of 3, what we believed. Because they knew we would have to answer that in a cold, hard world, who you are. If you don't know who you are walking into this world and what you believe, people will tell you what to believe. And I'll talk about that today. So the title of this talk, and I love that your guys' eyes are over here because we're going to get to that in a second. But the title of this talk today is How to Message Your Judeo-Christian Values to a Secular World. But before we talk about messaging, we have to take a step back and ask a question you probably have asked before. What are these Judeo-Christian values? Are they worth defending? How would I defend them? So when we talk messaging, I want you to also think the word defense. When you're talking about these things, you're going to innately be defending them in a world that may have never had it explained to them before. So Judeo-Christian values overall is worldviews that are commonly held by both the Jewish and Christian religions, the fundamental values of Western society that have come from both Judaism and Christianity. I met a sweet rabbi yesterday who actually came up to me and said something funny. He said, "Oh, Judeo-Christian values, I call that linguistic imperialism." I said, "Why?" He goes, "Well, because it was ours first, and then you guys took the good ideas." I said, "Okay, fair enough, fair enough." But they are some really good ideas. And these are some of the core teachings of our faith, which are also bedrocks of our American society. The fact that we've gotten to grow up in America means we've uniquely gotten to experience what these Judeo-Christian values have led to. I'm going to include a list here. It's not an exhaustive list, but to give you an overview of what these values are. Number 1, the idea that wisdom comes from an external source, being God, rather than from our hearts. Number 2, that free will is a gift from God and should be protected. That idea of free will, guys, is something I think the world probably doesn't quite understand, and we have to explain to them. but that we uniquely as individuals have the ability to make decisions, right from wrong, right? God did not make us robots. That gives us power, it gives us dignity. But that gift from God should be protected. So this means that any government must take care to guard our individual liberties, our ability to continue to have free will. You're seeing right now what it looks like when people try and pull away your ability to disagree through your free will. Our founding fathers emphasized that the importance of guarding these individual liberties, beginning with freedom of religion, freedom of speech, and property rights. This is a huge one. You've heard a lot about it already at CPAC, and I'm glad you have. The idea that the natural family, a man and a woman, and the children they bring into the world is the fundamental unit of society. Now, the place we start for this in the Judeo-Christian realm is in Genesis. It's in the creation story. I don't know what you've heard of it before, but I want to lay it out for you here because I think it's really, really winsome. So you've got Adam, who lives in a world where he's got everything he thinks he needs. He's got everything, in fact, we think you would need to thrive. But he doesn't have the Lord's blessing. God sees Adam and says, it's not good yet. He says it's not good for man to be alone. So God creates woman. The big plan of God involves God creating a mirror for a man, not a servant, but a mirror, a partner in accomplishing what God had intended to accomplish in regards to reflecting God's glory in a very real way. God's mission on earth very literally must include male and female partnering together to further his mission on earth. Now, this idea, I'll say as an aside, that women were only complementary, well, I think that can hurt us in the Christian faith because you think, well, man's the entree, but the woman's just like a French fry. No. He was not whole until he had woman. God said it was not good until he had woman. These are working together towards a mission. This whole idea of the woman's contributions when she's created, like I said, is not just a nice additive to the picture, but what we as women bring to human flourishing and the cultural mandate and the rule and the reign of God going forward, our contributions are not nice additives. They are essential and indispensable to the mission. Now, this is the one I get to work in all the time. This is the the dignity of human life. Exodus 20 says, "You shall not murder." That's very clear. Murder is of an innocent person. Now, when people and nations don't grant this respect and protect the preborn child and the born as well, this goes for the preborn child and the born, all other professed morals and values are meaningless because they are no longer undergirded by the most basic of human needs, the need to exist. The dignity of human life is not just a principle of the Bible, it's literally the beginning of any civilized society. We at Live Action, we're every day trying to figure out how to change hearts and minds on this issue, particularly on the preborn child. And our investigative reporting and some of our videos have shown that changing people's minds is happening. Over 80% of Americans now would say they want to limit abortion to the first 3 trimesters, if not outright altogether. It's happening. I don't want you to think that that issue is set in stone and it's not worth fighting for. We are absolutely changing minds. So here's a little history lesson, and I kind of tried to use this as an opportunity to teach you how to message on these Judeo-Christian values. As you and I and our families engage in a more secular society, it's going to be important to remind everyone how our own country was founded. I'll ask this question. How many of you here today have heard people, or yesterday, have heard people say from the stage, like kind of these grandiose things like, this is why we're great, or our country was founded on these principles. And you're thinking like, can you go one step further? Explain that for me. What are you talking about? So I'm gonna do that for you here. Many have asked and are still asking what role religion should play in a free society. The answers of the founders of our country would be that the issue of religion and freedom are inextricably linked. You cannot have freedom without religion. In fact, the political philosophy of the founders necessitated this sort of divine foundation. Thomas Jefferson made this clear in the Declaration of Independence when he says that all men are endowed with certain inalienable rights, endowed with rights. You don't have to ask them from the government. You are given them. You are endowed with those rights. The right to life, the right to pursue happiness. The purpose of government was not to bestow rights, but rather to protect those that we've already been gifted by God. But government is not enough for a moral society. A moral people is also required. A people moral enough to police itself. That said, here's what's really unique about our founding. They chose not to put Christianity into law. Think about that. Our founders had an opportunity in drafting the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence to put many of their Judeo-Christian values into law. The beauty, though, is that because they knew the importance of religious freedom, they were surely inspired by those religious teachings, but they made sure there would be freedom of religion for everyone in this new experiment in the United States. And think about what they were leaving. The idea of freedom of religion was heretical. What do you want to worship if not God? But they knew that that was an important part of who we would be, a freedom for people to disagree and believe different things. As I prepared for today's speech, a couple people brought up the idea of separation of church and state, and I always try and get some thoughts from people that I think most likely are conservative, people that I think maybe not, and that idea kept coming up. So I thought I had to address it today. I won't make you raise your hand because you guys are really smart. You know that the phrase separation of church and state is not found in the Constitution. If you didn't, it's fine. Just keep your hand down. But that phrase, separation of church and state, is not anywhere in the Constitution. But any of you who study law, public policy, watch the news, know that it's often used against us, right? Stop trying to force your religious beliefs on me. There's a clear separation of church and state. Supreme Court justices have used it. Why? Well, the closest we get to that phrase is in a letter Thomas Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Church in Connecticut. The church in Connecticut was concerned, as I read more about them, that there was not strong enough language in the First Amendment to protect their religious freedom. So they reach out, which is pretty cool. You guys think about it. I would assume most of you have jobs. If not, you work in school. Think about that you had access to the people that were writing the Constitution. You could ask your questions. Think about it in a work setting. You get to talk to the boss about some employee policies. You get to make sure that you're going to be free enough to do what you want to do. And that's what they asked Thomas Jefferson. He assured them that there would be a wall of separation. We've heard that term in the news a lot too. But a wall of separation between the state and religion. The state could not control the church. I want to flip this on its other coin for you, the other side of the coin here. This omission, this great omission from the Constitution is powerful. The Constitution doesn't have to say there's separation of church and state. By its very omission, it's embedded in there. Where, you ask? By omission, it is making very clear there is no state-sponsored religion. Think about it. Is there just one legal religion in the United States? Or is it like Iran, Egypt, Pakistan, places where there is only one legal religion and a total connectivity between church and state? There is literally no separation between church and state. Our nation was founded on these enlightened Christian ideals, and I say enlightened because our founding fathers, I really appreciate that they saw the room to allow other people to disagree and believe. And how we decided as the United States of America to order our government changed everything. So it makes me think of this scene in Talladega Nights. How many of you here have seen Talladega Nights? Okay, cool. Some of you are probably so smart, you're always in the books, you haven't seen this yet, but I encourage it. It's by a great philosopher, Will Ferrell, and teasing. I'm gonna play this scene for you, and I just want you to think of it in terms of our current state of affairs. So, I considered running in yelling, "Anarchy, anarchy," but I really thought that'd be not seen well from Vice President Pence's team, so I chose to show the video instead. So you see, we don't want anarchy, right? I'll put it to you this way. Raise your hand for me. Put your hand out. All right, congratulations. You are now bestowed as the leader of a new nation, full of people who have no guidance. You decide what you want government to look like. How will you bring chaos or order out of this chaos? That question you're facing, how to direct your government, how to help people thrive, is the question that history has been asking. That is the very question our founders asked. And what they came up with is a beautiful set of order that, no, it doesn't put Christianity or Judaism into law. It surely was inspired by those good things. But that is what's allowed us as a nation to thrive and become prosperous, while we see other nations that have not, because they have not seen it in the same way. They have not allowed this peaceful pluralism to take place. Interestingly, it was in the Old Testament that we got a picture of a representative democracy. Anybody who reads their Bible or knows the stories of the Old Testament knows that there are often times that the Israelites pleaded out for a king, right? Pleaded for a king. Sometimes it just seems easier. Just give me one person that can tell me what to do. We've seen different governments try this model out. But in the Old Testament, we see an example of delegating leaders and a very strong judicial system. So if you'll please me for 1 second, I'll read from Exodus 18 through 17. Moses' father-in-law says to him, Moses, the leader, "What you are doing is not good. You and all of these people who come to you will only wear you out. The work is too heavy for you. You cannot handle it alone. Listen now to me, and I will give you some advice, and may God be with you. You must be the people's representative before God and bring disputes to him. Teach them his decrees and instructions and show them the way they're to live and how they are to behave. But listen, select capable men from all the people, men who fear God, trustworthy men who hate dishonest gain." I wish Washington, D.C. looked more like that. "And appoint them as officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens." You see the delegation starting to happen, the representative democracy? "Have them serve as judges for the people at all times. But have them bring difficult cases to you, the simple cases they can decide themselves." How many of you have been in jury duty if you actually went? You are trusting that people can decide for themselves when presented information. Exodus says, "This will make your load lighter because they will share it with you. If you do this, and God so commands, you'll be able to stand the strain, and all of these people will go home satisfied." Moses listened to his father-in-law and did everything he said. He chose capable men from all Israel and made them leaders of the people, officials over thousands, hundreds, fifties, and tens. They served as judges for the people at all times. So again, oftentimes people ask for a king, but we have a very clear view here of what a representative democracy is and does. These values have changed history, and as I was preparing, I was very aware that I'm an evangelical Christian, so I wanted to make sure that I added some Jewish thought. So I wanted you guys to hear thoughts on this topic from everyone's favorite Jewish conservative commentator, Ben Shapiro. Ben points out, and he says this, and if you're wondering, why should I care? Why should I message? Why now? Like, why right now? Maybe I'll just teach my kids. Maybe I won't get involved. I want you to listen to this. Western society is very much in the midst of a crisis of purpose and ideas. Our current freedoms are built upon twin notions that every human being is made in God's image and that human beings were created with a purpose and very capable of exploring God's world. We can thank these values, he points out, for the birth of science, the very dream or idea of progress, the very idea of human rights, prosperity, peace, and artistic beauty. I think what Ben is making a really good note of there, guys, is that even this idea that there's progress to be made points back to a Judeo-Christian value, that we can change, that we are not set in the ways of how we grew up or the family we were brought into, but that your life has purpose and you can change. Think about the coolest and most amazing advances in science, technology, art. Was that from any government official telling someone to step up to bat and do it? Absolutely not. Think about the work you're doing today. Is that because the government is telling you you need to contribute? The government is saying you need to step up. No, it's because you, in your innate human dignity, want to make the world better, want to make your own life better, and allow you and your neighbor to thrive. That's why you're at CPAC this week, so I'm really, really glad you're here. Shapiro points out that these values have risen up people and nations. Jerusalem and Athens built America, ended slavery, defeated the Nazis and the communists, lifted billions from poverty, and gave billions spiritual purpose. Jerusalem and Athens were the foundations of the Magna Carta, the Treaty of Westphalia, it actually ended one of the greatest and most widespread conflicts in Europe in the 20th century. They were the foundations of documents you're familiar with, the Declaration of Independence, Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation, and MLK's letter from Birmingham jail. He also points out that civilizations that reject these ideas, he's using Jerusalem and Athens, but we can think Judeo-Christian, they have collapsed into dust. The USSR rejected Judeo-Christian values and natural law, substituting a new utopian vision of, quote, social justice, which we are seeing in our nation today, and they starved and slaughtered tens of millions of people. The Nazis rejected Judeo-Christian values and shoved children into gas chambers. Venezuela rejects Judeo-Christian values and natural law, and citizens of their oil-rich nation are now eating dogs. We are in the process of abandoning these Judeo-Christian values, favoring a moral subjectivity, the rule of passion. You guys have all seen it, the mob rule. We're watching our civilization collapse into tribalism and hedonism and moral subjectivity. We believe we can reject these values and natural law and satisfy ourselves, but we can't. Dennis Prager points out a pretty cool thing that I did not know, and I wanted to share with you guys. Christians who founded America saw themselves as heirs to the Old Testament. They identified with the Jews. Even Thomas Jefferson's name was a Jewish name. And he wanted the design of the seal of the U.S. to depict the Jews actually leaving Egypt. Founders probably studied Hebrew as much as they studied Greek, and the words on the Liberty Bell, proclaim liberty throughout the land, are from the Torah. So we have a strong tie to the Jewish people, and I know there's actually a panel after this, and I think it's on the main stage with my friend Ilana Meisel, and I encourage you to go watch her talk about the beauty of Israel. So what happens to nations, guys, that don't allow for the continuation of us to talk about, to message our values? Emily Cow over at Heritage Foundation laid out a beautiful structure. The way history has shown the treatment of religious minorities dissolving. She talks about 4 things: social ostracizing of religious minorities, economic discrimination, legal penalties, which I've seen having worked at ADF, and violence. Problems arise when governments try to force conformity to a single view of what is sacred. Governments do far better to honor people's individual freedom to determine for themselves their future. That's the path to pluralism and peace. But this awful journey of eliminating and ostracizing religious minorities has already happened. You guys have watched the news, you know, in Saudi Arabia, official textbooks actually teach students to compare Christians and Jews to dogs and pigs. What does that do to the Jews and Christians that are living in those communities? The next step is economically disenfranchising these communities, religious minorities. In Egypt, for instance, Coptic Christians face extreme prejudice when looking for work, be it with the police or the military or even just trying to join a professional soccer team. Next comes the criminalization of those minority religious beliefs. In Pakistan, for example, a Catholic woman, many of you have heard of Asia Bibi, she was sitting on death row for allegedly talking poorly of Muhammad. The ugly doings that can occur when activists promote the punishment of nonconformists allow the government to intervene, and instead of protecting minorities, they stay silent. How many of you here have watched the movie or read the book 1984? I would encourage you to go back and continue to read that or watch that. It's actually quite scary. It's a little bit dark of a movie and a book, but it really does a great job talking about nonconformists and the way they're treated. And there's a line in that movie, and I wish I could pull it up quickly, but it talks about a thought crime. And in that community, in this fictional place in 1984, people were actually being reported for thought crimes because they could tell you thought something against the government. And there were penalties for that. And I know that sounds crazy, but when you think of cases like Jack Phillips, who's the amazing Christian baker, or Baronel Stutzman, the florist who just simply didn't want to have to create custom arrangements for a same-sex wedding, she didn't do anything to hurt anyone. Same for Chief Kelvin Cochran, the amazing firefighter in Atlanta, Georgia, who wrote a devotional book. They weren't doing anything to hurt anyone. It was simply a thought, simply a belief that they had. These are the best people I've ever met in my life, having spent time with them. And the idea that they were being penalized by their city and our country for a thought, a belief that they held, is quite scary. And it's tragic because we should be able to persuade each other to our side rather than force someone to see the world or participate in the world in the way that we'd want them to. So who should message these values? All of us. Some of you in here are people of faith, some of you are not, but I welcome, even if you could consider yourself someone who is not religious, to accept these values as good and pivotal. When I first got asked to speak on this panel, I had a problem with the title. The title is How to Message Your Values in a Secular Society. Okay, fine, I get it. We all know what that means. There is no such thing as someone who does not have a set of beliefs that they run their life by. So if we are entering the world as individuals, parents, kids, friends, if we're entering the world thinking, I have my set of beliefs, but I'm walking into a place that's secular. I'm going to school, I'm going to work, I'm not going to church, then you're thinking about it wrong. Every single human being worships something, whether that's beauty or age or time or productivity or even honoring the thought that there is no God. That itself is a faith belief. That itself is their worldview. So I think part of the step of messaging is to realize that you better have something to say because the rest of the so-called secular world is saying what they believe every day. If it feels like you're walking into a bit of a battlefield, it's because you are. Your beliefs are different maybe than the person's next to you, but they run their life and they should also run yours. My next thought is this. I know this is why you came. How do we message these values? So I'm going to lay it out pretty simply. I tried to make it like the 7 deadliest sins of messaging your Judeo-Christian values. I only got to 5, so you'll be thankful for that. Here are 5 big mistakes to avoid when messaging and 5 things to do in order to allow someone to see the side of Judeo-Christian values. Number 1, not doing it. I think that's probably the biggest sin or mistake that's happening today. Again, you're walking into a world that's craving to understand why these people claim to believe in Judeo-Christian values. These old, ancient thoughts. Well, we are conservatives because we want to conserve the good, right? We don't just conserve things that are old. That would make us hoarders. If you've watched these hoarder shows, you know there's a lot of the people that are hoarding are not differentiating between what's good and what's not good, what's valuable and what's not valuable, right? They're just holding on to all of it. We as conservatives are saying we're here to conserve the good that came out of this great experiment in our country. So I encourage you to do that for yourself. Look into it. Which of those values are good? What have they led to? When we've gotten rid of certain values, what has that led to? So do it. Step up and do the hard work of knowing what you believe and what those good conservative values are. Second, be bold. That's my answer. If you're doing it, not doing it is number 1 mistake. The answer to that is to be bold. Our nation was founded on these principles. And I'll tell you this, guys, it's not easy to talk about. I don't want to diminish the height of the wall that you have to get over to have this kind of conversation, even with your own family, your own friends. I actually think that's the hardest. I'd rather go talk to a complete stranger about these things because there's repercussions for your beliefs. But I want you to be bold. These are good values. They've sustained our society. It's helped us to be the freest, most prosperous nation in the world. And if you think about it, if you get a lot of pushback, I want to encourage you in this. Our worst errors as a nation are when we actually departed from Christian morality. Our evil treatment of slaves is an incredible example. The killing of preborn children in the womb is another. People want to know that you're smart enough to acknowledge that sometimes we've done it wrong. And just because we are a Judeo-Christian nation doesn't mean things have happened perfectly. But I will say this. I think in the case of slavery, it was true Christianity, true belief in the human dignity of people that got us out of that great moral evil and human rights issue. And in the same way, I believe that it is going to be true Christianity, understanding who God is and who he has made every unique individual to be, that will get us out of that great human rights issue. Second, a great mistake that I see, and you've seen too, is not doing this lovingly. And I want to say that carefully because I think there's a fine line in a spectrum between truth and love. We've all heard deliver truth and love. But if you're all truth and no love, you're at legalism. And if you're at all love and no truth, you're at anarchy. Right? There is a fine line between truth and love. Our goal in politics and in every part of our life should be to win people over to see the world as we do, not to hurt them. I think you're seeing right now a world that's honoring the big bullies. And I'm seeing some of you nod. We honor people who bully others and hurt others, maybe because it makes us feel good. But if you're going to tell me you're trying to apply your Judeo-Christian values and that you actually believe that people are they have worth and they were made in the image of God, your goal is for them to walk away, maybe with a pebble in their shoe that bothers them because you spoke some truth, not for them to think that you think they're an idiot and so far gone that it's not even worth them exploring your side of the idea. Because as soon as you call them an idiot or imply that they're not capable of understanding, you've given them an out to actually thinking through your side of the issue. So I would say care more about your opinions carrying intellectual weight and moral weight than your ability to maybe burn someone on Twitter or even in person. I think it's easier to do behind the keyboard, but... So I like how Os Guinness describes this balance between truth and love. He describes Christians, particularly, as impossible people. He has a book by that name. Maybe he'll give me a little credit for promoting it today, but it's a really good book, and he says, impossible people are those who have hearts that can melt with compassion, but with faces like flint and backbones of steel, who are unmanipulable, unbribable, undeterrable, and unclubbable, without ever losing the gentleness, the mercy, the grace, and the compassion of our Lord. Isn't that beautiful? We are to have hearts that melt with compassion, but we are also to be undeterrable in our belief in the need for God's truth. I think if you need someone to look at, I'm an oldest sister, so I always wish I had like an older sister or brother to look at. And I've found myself adopting some kind of big sister, big brother types. If I describe that quote to you, and you can think of someone who does that really well, I can't encourage you enough to get around them and learn from them and absorb all the goodness they're putting into the world. And I'll say this, I think my boss actually does a really good job at that. Her name's Lila Rose. You can follow her online, and I'm not just saying this because she's my boss. But there is a unique intensity and gentleness to her message on the issue of life that I have found to be incredibly educational and winsome. So find those people, and if you don't have one, I encourage you. I think Lila's really good at it, and since I haven't thought of any others, I won't speak off the cuff, but Os Guinness is another one who I think does a good job. Do this lovingly. When you're engaging with someone, guys, I encourage you to get to your message across, you need to ask a lot of questions. What Live Action has done is we've gone undercover in a lot of Planned Parenthood clinics. If you guys have seen the videos, we're engaging with them. You'll notice if you watch them back, we don't run in and speak much, right? That old idea that God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. We walk in and we ask questions. You don't know what your opponent believes, and we are wrong to often assume we think we do. You wouldn't like if someone came to CPAC and therefore assumed they know exactly how you feel about every issue. There's nuance even in this room. So let's not do it to our opponents. Ask questions. When we go into Planned Parenthood clinics, we ask. They'll say something like termination of pregnancy. And we'll go, oh, what's termination of pregnancy? They'll say, oh, product of conception. What is that? What is that product of conception? Just to try and get them to explain actually where they're at and what they're talking about. Oftentimes, I've seen in our work that people's minds change because they get an opportunity to hear the opposition's logic fall on itself. So I encourage you, ask questions of your friends, family, the people you're engaging with, to see where they're at. You may have more common ground than you know, and if not, at least you know where you can start addressing things. The next big mistake or deadly sin is forgetting that there's people behind these issues. I don't like this idea like the issue of abortion, the issue of marriage, the issue of immigration. Sure, that's how we address it in politics. There are people behind this, and we as Christians should remember that, and the world should know us as some of the most compassionate people because we know we are also broken. We are also in this limbo of figuring out who we are to be, and so I think that that's important that we never mock or belittle those that suffer differently than us. I'll say it again. We should never mock or belittle those who suffer differently than us. These are our neighbors to be respected and served. There are people that feel alienated in whatever demographic they're in or social situation they're in. And in a fallen universe, we're all alienated in some way and far from who we're designed to be. And that alienation is going to look different in different people. So I encourage you, personalize. The good side of this is personalize these stories. I shared with you about my dad growing up as an orphan, my mom being poor. Like, personalizing that you are a human being, you care about human beings, I would love to see us do more, both as conservatives and as Christians, because there's a reason you believe what you believe. I know it. And if we could sit down for coffee or wine, you could hopefully tell me why. Like, what riles you up when you see injustice? What moment do you see of mercy in your life that you want to bring more mercy or more justice to the world? That, guys, you should be sharing. You should be talking about. Because the world doesn't need more like bumper sticker quick tweets. The world needs more nuance. That's why we're seeing this year of podcasting, right? Everyone has a podcast. Chris is in the back. He can help you start one if you'd like. The beauty of podcasts is that there's nuance. People want to know, they want to learn, they know, they're smart enough that oftentimes these issues aren't so cut and dry. How do we walk around it? The next is gossiping and complaining. This is something I struggle with. I think we all struggle with. It is like the national sport of the United States to just complain about our commute once we're at work, our commute back, the house we live in, the neighborhood we live in. It happens. But I want to encourage you that I even engaged in this on Twitter to not just complain. I saw someone do it really beautifully. There was an image put up of a law enforcement vehicle in Canada that has a rainbow stripe on it, and it says LGBT Enforcement Rights Division. And this is in Peel Regional County in Canada. And I explored a little bit, and they have different units, and someone had posted this picture on their Facebook. And the complaining that I saw happening from some people I knew, some people I could tell from their comments were Christian, really stuck out to me. Because there was one guy who goes, yeah, this is unfortunate, but you know what? Kind of cool to see like what good's gonna come out of it in terms of people really deciding what they believe on this issue and how we deal with these conversations. And just that little like nugget of vision casting, I think goes really, really far. Thanks. I think goes really far. So I struggle with this. I bet you guys do too. And I hope CPAC is like uplifting. I hope you're not leaving thinking this is like a list of things to complain about. We have to balance that out with the vision of good that we want for the world. So when I am at work and I'm talking about abortion, I can't just get mad that abortion is happening. I need to cast a positive vision into the world that women are strong enough even to handle an unplanned pregnancy. Women are strong enough to bring life into the world, and that fertility is beautiful. We should support women in that. That's, I think, a much more digestible and appealing message to people. They want that. And I'll end with this. I think we all need to do the hard work of ensuring the accuracy of our beliefs, both through research and through making sure we understand the other side. My boss said this in a previous session, and I thought it really fit here. We as those who claim to believe in Judeo-Christian values, we are held to a different standard, aren't we? The media can run with headlines that are wrong, and then they can be completely found to be wrong, and they don't have to issue apologies. They don't correct those stories. But we, on our side, if we are inaccurate once or twice, your credibility is gone. You can issue an apology, that's fine, but it's not going to get you back on that same grounding. So I know at Live Action News, every day we're double checking, is that true? For example, when I saw that picture with the law enforcement vehicle, before commenting, I was like, is that true? I can see Peel Regional, let me look it up, let me see, is that a real thing in a real place? Do the hard work, guys. The more we're online and the more there is the share of information online, we have to make sure we are accurate. You're not sharing information that's gonna allow people to just push you to the side as someone who's not doing their due diligence in using logic and facts. So I guess you could put that under, do this smart, do this well. Speak to the heart, not just the head. I hope I did that today. They came in and said 5 minutes a couple minutes ago, so I'll just wrap up and say that I hope that these principles are helpful for you. I don't think what I did today is an exhaustive list, but I hope that it inspired you to leave knowing, number one, that we each are responsible for knowing what we believe. We each are responsible for sharing that with the world, because the world is sharing their religion with us right now. And number three, that it is okay to be proud of the way this great nation was formed, because it's allowed, if you think about it, even for the current state of craziness right now. The fact that we have people that can ask members of Congress questions, the fact that we have judicial confirmations that we can all fight over and send our activists to, That's beautiful. We can argue these good points safely, well, and try and persuade others, and that's the good of our nation. So thank you so much, and I think I have time for one question before someone yells at us. Go ahead.
I was just at the Heritage Foundation last Thursday night, and I heard something really powerful. We have to learn, all of us, to listen to everybody. When you're being attacked by others that don't support our president, we have to listen very quietly, understand where they're coming from, and maybe sometimes slightly agree with something they say, because if you slightly agree, you might get something back from them.
Well said.
Be engaged with you, but listening to people, waiting for them to talk, and then speaking calmly is very crucial.
Awesome, thank you. All right, everyone, thank you so much for having me. I'll be around after if you have a question. Thanks.